Chapter 11. The Price of Salvation. Sera struggled to her feet, hastily wiping tears from her face as the prince approached. His yellow robes caught the evening light in that unnaturally perfect way, making him seem to glow against the darkening sky. Behind him, Concordant Elderweave had gone very still, like a small animal in the presence of a much larger predator.
Truly remarkable,
the prince said, gesturing to the newly stabilized platform.
To achieve such harmony while in obvious emotional turmoil. You continue to exceed my expectations, Miss Night Whisper.
Sera tried to step back, but found herself against the crystal array. Its song had changed subtly, resonating with something in the prince's own magical signature.
What do you want?
Want?
His perfect smile held something almost like genuine warmth.
I want exactly what you want, to save as many people as possible from the failing anchor network, to preserve our way of life among the clouds.
He spread his hands elegantly.
Though I must admit, you've found a far more elegant solution than my own methods.
You mean your weapons?
The words came out bitter.
The ones Casper helped you design?
Ah.
The prince's jade eyes softened with what looked remarkably like sympathy.
You've learned about that unpleasantness. I had hoped to explain it to you myself in a more appropriate context.
He moved to examine the crystal array, his movements graceful despite the platform's lingering instability.
Did anyone tell you how many cities we saved in those early days, before ideology and politics complicated everything?
His perfect features showed a flash of real emotion.
We had such dreams then, Casper and I, such hopes for creating real change.
By forcing cities to submit to your control.
By creating a system that could sustain itself.
The prince's voice turned passionate.
Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain fusion magic arrays across multiple kingdoms? The resources required, the skilled workers needed, the raw materials alone.
He shook his head.
Good intentions don't pay for crystal mining expeditions or fund research into new stabilization techniques.
Sera found herself drawn into his logic despite herself.
So you charge for protection? Force people to pay tribute?
I ask them to contribute to their own salvation.
He turned to face her fully.
These platforms you've so brilliantly stabilized. How long do you think they'll last without maintenance? Without properly trained technicians to monitor the harmonics? Without supply lines to bring new crystals when the old ones degrade?
His smile turned rueful.
Heroic acts of magical innovation are wonderful, but someone has to handle the mundane reality of keeping people in the sky.
The worst part was, Sera could see his point, could see the cold logic behind his actions. Even her own tea house required constant resources. New crystals, specialized equipment, carefully sourced ingredients.
But the weapons,
she said, forcing herself to remember.
The platforms you deliberately destabilized.
Regrettable necessities.
Real pain crossed his features.
Do you think I enjoy it? Watching cities fall because their leaders are too proud to accept help. Too wrapped up in tradition and ideology to embrace practical solutions.
He gestured to the stabilized platform around them.
Look what you achieved here today. Look how many lives you saved. Now imagine being able to do that everywhere, with proper support and resources.
At the cost of their freedom.
At the cost of their pride.
The prince's voice gentled.
What good is theoretical freedom if you're falling from the sky? What use is political independence to the dead?
He moved closer, his presence somehow both comforting and dangerous.
I don't want subjects, Miss Night Whisper. I want partners in building something sustainable, something that can truly save our way of life.
Sera felt her certainty wavering. She thought of all the platforms still showing signs of instability, of all the people who couldn't afford proper magical maintenance. Thought of her own struggles to source materials for her experimental work.
Your mother understood,
the prince said softly.
Before everything. She saw the bigger picture, saw that sometimes practical necessities had to outweigh perfect principles.
His jade eyes held hers.
She was working with us, you know, until ideology and politics corrupted everything. Until good intentions and rigid moral standards cost us our best chance at real solutions.
Until she discovered what your weapons could do?
Sera corrected, but her voice shook slightly.
Until she let perfect principles blind her to necessary compromises.
The prince sighed.
Just as Casper eventually did. just as so many idealists do, when faced with the harsh realities of trying to save people who don't want to be saved on anything but their own terms.
He turned to survey the darkening sky, where lights were beginning to flicker on across the stabilized platforms.
Do you know what happens to cities that refuse my help? That insist on maintaining their independence at any cost?
His perfect features showed genuine grief.
They fall. Not because I attack them, but because they cannot sustain themselves, cannot afford the resources needed to maintain their anchor networks, cannot access the expertise needed to prevent harmonic degradation.
So you offer them a choice between submission and death?
I offer them a choice between practical reality and proud destruction.
He looked at her again, and something in his expression made her magical senses hum with warning.
The same choice I'm offering you now.
Sera's breath caught.
What?
Join me.
He held out one elegant hand.
Help me create something sustainable, something that can truly save our people, not just patch temporary solutions onto failing systems.
His perfect smile warmed.
You've already proven you can stabilize platforms more efficiently than anyone since Casper. Together, we could implement your innovations across all the Sky Kingdoms, create real, lasting change.
Under your control.
Under practical administration.
His jade eyes held hers.
Everything has a price, Miss Night Whisper. Even salvation, even change. The only question is whether we're willing to pay it.
Sera looked at his offered hand, at the yellow silk that caught the last rays of sunset. Thought of all the platforms she'd stabilized today, of all the ones still showing signs of harmonic degradation. Thought of how hard it had been to work alone, without proper resources or support. The crystal array hummed behind her, its song a reminder of different kinds of harmony, of tea leaves finding their natural blend, of magic flowing without force or control, of hearts finding their own rhythm, of things that couldn't be bought or controlled or administered, no matter how practical the reasons.
No,
she said softly. The prince's perfect smile didn't waver, but something dangerous flickered in his jade eyes.
Consider carefully, Miss Night Whisper. Not everyone gets this choice twice.
I have considered it.
She straightened her spine, feeling the crystal array's song strengthen behind her.
And I choose to find another way.
Ah,
His hand dropped elegantly to his side.
just like your mother, just like Casper.
His smile turned sad.
Just as idealistic, just as doomed to learn the hard way that good intentions don't keep people in the sky.
He turned to go, his yellow robes catching the last light like captured sunshine. But at the platform's edge, he paused.
When you change your mind,
He said softly.
when you finally understand that practical necessity must outweigh perfect principles, I'll be waiting.
The worst part, Sera thought as she watched him disappear into the gathering dark, was that she could almost see his point, could almost understand how someone might start with good intentions and end up justifying anything in their name, could almost imagine herself making the same choices if she let herself believe that control was the only way to create lasting change. The crystal array's song changed behind her, as if wondering which harmony she would ultimately choose. The back routes to the tea house were darker than Sera remembered. Or maybe that was just her exhaustion making the shadows deeper, the maintenance platforms more treacherous. Her magic felt raw after stabilizing so many platforms alone. And her emotions? She pushed that thought away, focusing on navigating the narrow walkways between the middle markets and her home. The harmonic beacons Casper had given her still pulsed in her pocket, their steady rhythm a torment she couldn't bring herself to silence. A sound behind her made her turn, but the shadows revealed nothing. Still, something felt wrong. The anchor crystal's song had changed subtly, taking on an off-key note that made her magical senses prickle with warning. The attack came from multiple directions at once. Dark figures emerged from the shadows, their movements too coordinated to be random thugs. Sera reached for her magic, but exhaustion made her reaction slow. A blow caught her shoulder, sending her stumbling against a railing. She managed to deflect the next attack with a burst of harmonic energy, but there were too many of them, and they seemed to know exactly how to disrupt her magical defenses, their own power creating discordant patterns that made it impossible to focus.
Nothing personal.
One of them growled as his companion's boot connected with her ribs.
Just business.
Sera felt something crack. Pain blossomed through her chest as she tried to draw breath. She reached desperately for the harmonic beacons, but strong hands knocked them from her grasp. The devices skittered across the platform and disappeared into the darkness below. How fitting, she thought distantly as another blow landed, losing the last pieces of him like this. Through the pain and growing darkness, she was aware of the attackers discussing something in low voices. Whether to throw her after the beacons, perhaps. But before they could decide, new harmonics rippled through the air. Yellow light blazed suddenly across the platform. The attackers scattered like startled cats as Prince Darius descended from above, his perfect robes somehow untouched by the violence around him.
My deepest apologies, Miss Nightwhisper,
he said, kneeling beside her fallen form. His touch was gentle as he examined her injuries.
The lower docks can be so dangerous at night. I happened to be passing when I felt the harmonic disturbance.
Sera tried to speak, but pain shot through her chest. The world began to fade around the edges.
Rest,
the prince murmured, and she felt his magic wrap around her like silk.
You're safe now. I'll take care of everything.
Darkness took her before she could protest. She woke to luxury she'd never imagined. The prince's flagship put every other cloud ship to shame, its crystal arrays humming with pure, perfectly controlled harmonics. The healing chamber where she lay seemed crafted from light itself, every surface designed to amplify restoration magic.
How do you feel?
Sera turned carefully to find the prince seated nearby, his yellow robes perfectly arranged despite the late hour. A crystal goblet of something that sparkled like starlight sat on a small table beside him.
Like I got kicked by several large men.
She managed, though the pain in her ribs had faded to a dull ache.
Why did you help me?
Why wouldn't I?
His perfect smile held genuine concern.
Contrary to what some might believe, I take no pleasure in seeing brilliant young innovators hurt. Especially not one with your particular gifts.
He stood gracefully, moving to adjust something in the healing array. The harmonics shifted, sending warm energy flowing through her battered body.
Besides,
he continued,
I would be a poor administrator indeed if I allowed random violence in my territories. Those men will be dealt with, I assure you.
Sera watched him work the crystal arrays with practiced ease. His magic moved through the harmonics like water finding its own level, controlled but not forced. It reminded her painfully of someone else.
This is what I've been trying to show you,
the prince said softly, noting her attention to the arrays.
What proper resources and support can achieve. These healing chambers, the stabilization technologies, the research facilities.
He gestured to their elegant surroundings.
All of this could be at your disposal. All of your experiments properly funded, your innovations implemented on a scale that could truly make a difference.
At what cost?
But Sera heard the uncertainty in her own voice. The healing magic flowing through her felt like everything she'd ever wanted to achieve with her fusion experiments. Different frequencies working together in perfect harmony, creating something greater than the sum of their parts.
At the cost of accepting that change requires structure.
The prince's jade eyes held hers.
That innovation without administration leads to chaos. That good intentions without practical framework lead to...
He paused delicately.
Well, to lying broken on maintenance platforms, perhaps?
Sera looked away. The attackers had known exactly how to disrupt her magic, had moved with too much coordination for common thugs. Her thoughts went to concordant elderweave's thinly veiled threats, to the Order's growing hostility toward her fusion magic experiments.
The Order grows desperate,
the prince said softly, as if reading her thoughts.
They see their control slipping away as more people embrace new possibilities. It makes them dangerous to those who challenge their authority.
His voice held something like protective anger, though his perfect composure never wavered.
This is why proper administration is so vital, why innovation requires structure and protection to flourish. The world can be very dangerous for brilliant young innovators who work alone.
You mean refuse to submit to your control?
I mean, refuse to accept that everything worthwhile has a price.
He moved to the window, where the lights of ethertide sparkled below them.
Look at your tea house, Miss Night Whisper. The resources required to maintain it, the costs of importing rare ingredients, the constant upkeep of your equipment. Did all of that appear from nowhere? Or did it require careful administration, proper pricing, practical compromises between ideal and reality?
Sera said nothing, but she felt the truth of his words like a physical ache. How many times had she adjusted her experimental blends based on what materials she could afford? How many innovations had she delayed because she lacked proper equipment?
I'm offering you everything you need to make real change.
The prince continued softly.
Not just temporary solutions, but lasting stability. The resources to implement your brilliant innovations across all the Sky Kingdoms. The support to develop your gifts fully, without constraint of material limitation.
He returned to her bedside, offering that same elegant hand he had earlier.
Join me, Miss Night Whisper. Help me create something truly sustainable. Something that can save not just a few platforms, but our entire way of life.
Sera looked at his offered hand, at the perfect yellow silk that caught the crystal light. Thought of her tea house's careful bookkeeping, of resources always stretched thin, of experiments limited by practical reality. The healing array's song shifted around her, pure and controlled, and everything she'd ever wanted her magic to achieve. Everything she could achieve with proper support and resources. Everything that could be hers for just the small price of her independence.
I need time
She whispered.
to think.
Of course.
The prince's smile warmed with understanding.
Rest now. Let the healing magic do its work. We can discuss practical details when you're stronger.
He moved toward the door, his robes catching the light like captured sunshine. But he paused at the threshold, jade eyes finding hers one last time.
Remember,
He said softly.
everything worthwhile has a price. The only question is whether we're willing to pay it, or watch everything we care about fall from the sky.
The healing array's song followed him out, its perfect harmonics a reminder of everything she could have, everything she could achieve, everything she might have to sacrifice to save what mattered most. The healing chamber's pure harmonics had almost convinced Sera by morning. Not just the perfect resonance of its arrays, but the sheer potential they represented. With resources like these, with proper support and equipment, how many people could she help? How many platforms could she save? She stood at the chamber's window, watching dawn paint the clouds in shades of gold that reminded her painfully of sun-bleached hair and crooked smiles. But those memories felt distant now, wrapped in layers of betrayal and practical necessity.
Have you considered my offer?
The prince's voice was gentle as he entered, yellow robes catching the morning light. Behind him, guards in gleaming uniform took up positions by the door.
I have.
Sera turned from the window, her decision heavy in her chest.
You're right about the practical realities. About good intentions not being enough to keep people in the sky.
I knew you would see it eventually. You're too intelligent not to recognize the necessity of proper administration.
The resources you could provide.
She gestured to the healing arrays, to all the technological marvels around them.
Think how many people we could help. How many cities we could save if we did things properly.
Together.
He held out that elegant hand again.
Think of it, Miss Night Whisper. Your brilliant innovations combined with my practical framework. We could transform the entire Sky Kingdom system.
Sera started to reach for his hand. But as she did, one of the guards shifted position, and something in his movement caught her attention. Something familiar. The realization hit like lightning. She knew that stance, that particular way of distributing weight, had seen it on the maintenance platform last night, right before a boot connected with her ribs. Her eyes snapped to the guard's face. He wore the prince's uniform now instead of common thug's clothes, but she recognized him. Recognized the way he'd said, "Nothing personal. Just business." The prince saw the moment understanding dawned. His perfect smile didn't waver, but something in his jade eyes turned cold.
"Ah,"
he said softly.
"I was rather hoping you wouldn't notice that particular detail yet."
You
Sera backed away from his offered hand.
arranged the attack to make me vulnerable, to make me see the need for your protection.
I arranged a practical demonstration.
His voice remained gentle, even as guards moved to block the exits.
Sometimes people need to understand their vulnerability before they can appreciate proper security.
By having them beaten? By orchestrating violence to make your point?
The Healing Array's song took on a discordant note that matched her rising horror.
Everything you said about practical necessity, about the price of keeping people safe.
Is absolutely true.
Now an edge of frustration entered his voice.
Yes, I sometimes employ methods that idealists might question. Yes, I orchestrate circumstances to achieve necessary ends, because someone has to make the hard choices, Miss Night Whisper. Someone has to be practical about saving our way of life.
Practical?
The word tasted like ash.
Was it practical to corrupt fusion magic into weapons? To destroy cities that wouldn't submit? To arrange attacks on anyone who might threaten your control?
Yes,
His perfect features showed real pain.
because good intentions don't keep people in the sky. Pure principles don't pay for stabilization arrays. And sometimes, sacrificing a few to save many is the only practical choice.
He gestured, and more guards entered, carrying what looked like a modified crystal array. But where normal arrays channeled magic in natural patterns, this one seemed designed to force it, to tear it from its source.
I had hoped you would understand.
The prince said as they began setting up the device.
That you would see the necessity of practical action over moral absolutes. But it seems you're determined to follow your mother's path. And Casper's.
His smile turned sad.
Choosing perfect principles over practical solutions. Ideals over actual salvation.
They chose right over wrong.
Sera shot back, though her voice shook slightly.
The harder path over evil dressed up as expedience.
Evil?
Now real anger flickered in his jade eyes.
Is it evil to save millions by sacrificing thousands? To achieve real, lasting change through occasionally unsavory means? The world isn't as simple as right and wrong, Miss Night Whisper. Sometimes the only practical choice is the one that lets us sleep a little less easily at night.
The guards moved toward her. Sera reached for her magic, but exhaustion and lingering injury made her reactions slow. They caught her arms, forced her toward the waiting device.
Your mother never understood either.
The prince continued as they strapped her into place.
She had such brilliant insights about fusion magic, such innovative ideas about harmonic resonance, but she couldn't accept the practical applications of her research. Couldn't understand that sometimes power must be taken by force when it won't be given freely.
The device hummed to life around her. Sera felt its wrongness in her bones, the way it twisted natural harmonics into something cruel and hungry. Like fusion magic turned inside out, like tea leaves forced to blend against their nature.
This was one of my first innovations.
The prince said, examining the array with something like pride.
A way to transfer magical ability from one person to another. Hardly elegant, I admit, but quite practical when dealing with those who won't use their gifts properly.
You're going to take my magic?
I'm going to transfer it to someone more willing to employ it practically.
His perfect smile held genuine regret.
Someone who understands that real change requires difficult choices, that saving our way of life means sometimes choosing expedience over ideology.
He adjusted something on the array, and Sera felt the first pulling sensation in her magical core. Like her power was being slowly unknitted, like the very harmony of her being was being unwoven.
I truly am sorry about this,
The prince said softly.
You have such extraordinary gifts, such brilliant insights about natural harmonics. In time, you might have come to understand the necessity of practical action.
He sighed elegantly.
But I'm afraid we've run out of time for gentle persuasion. The anchor network continues to fail and I need your innovations implemented now.
You'll never make it work.
Sera managed through gritted teeth as the device pulled at her magic.
Forced harmony isn't harmony at all. It's just another kind of discord.
Perhaps.
His jade eyes watched dispassionately as she struggled against the restraints.
But discord that keeps people in the sky is better than harmony that lets them fall.
He turned to leave, yellow robes catching the morning light.
I'll return once the transfer is complete. Try to rest. The process can be quite uncomfortable.
The door closed behind him with terrible finality. Sera fought against the device's pull, but she could feel her magic being slowly torn away. Could feel the natural harmonics that made her who she was being twisted into something else, something wrong. The last thing she saw before pain overwhelmed her was the sunrise, painting the clouds in shades of gold, like sun-bleached hair in morning light, like hope slowly fading into shadow, like everything she believed in dissolving into practical necessity and expedient choices. Chapter 12. Breaking Points. The device pulled at Sera's magic like teeth, tearing silk apart thread by thread. Each strand of power that unraveled left her feeling more hollow, more lost. She'd always defined herself by her magic. The experimental tea master, the fusion magic innovator, the girl who could read harmonics like other people read books. Who would she be without it? The thought hurt more than the physical pain of the device, more than the betrayal of the prince's perfect lies, more than the memory of Casper's secrets and her own stubborn pride that had driven him away. Casper. The name echoed in the emptiness growing inside her. She'd been so afraid of trusting him, of letting someone that close, so determined to maintain perfect control over her heart the way she did her magic. And now she might lose both, might become someone who couldn't even sense the harmony in a proper tea blend.
Your resonance patterns are degrading beautifully.
One of the prince's technicians observed, adjusting something on the device.
Soon there won't be enough magic left in you to brew a proper cup of tea, let alone stabilize platforms.
Sera closed her eyes against sudden tears. She remembered that first morning in her tea house, when her careful control had slipped and the pressure gauge had exploded. Remembered Casper catching her, steadying her, looking at her like she was fascinating instead of dangerous, even covered in tea leaves and magical residue. He'd seen her then, really seen her. Not just her power or her potential usefulness, but her. The experimental heart under the proper tea master's facade. The girl who wanted to let magic flow naturally instead of forcing it into traditional patterns. The girl who'd wanted to let love flow naturally too, if only she hadn't been so afraid. Another strand of magic tore loose. Sera bit back a cry as harmonics that had been part of her since birth twisted into discord. The device's hunger was relentless, pulling apart everything that made her who she was with mechanical precision. Would Casper still look at her that way if he saw her now? Powerless, broken, unable even to sense the magical frequencies that had drawn them together? Or would she be just another failed experiment, like his work with the prince, like all his good intentions gone wrong? But he tried to explain. A quiet voice whispered in her mind. He tried to tell you about after, about why he changed sides. And you wouldn't listen, too afraid of your own feelings to hear his. The truth of it hurt worse than the device's pull. She'd used his secrets as an excuse to push him away, to maintain that careful distance she'd always kept between herself and real connection. Just like she'd used tradition and proper behavior to hide her experimental magic, to keep people from seeing who she really was.
Harmonic degradation at 60%.
The technician announced.
Quite impressive how your magic fights it, though. Most subjects are completely drained by now.
Sera barely heard him. She was lost in memories, of Casper's hands steady on hers as they worked magic together, of his voice soft in her ear as they navigated storm winds, of his kiss in the temple tasting like possibility. Of all the moments she'd held herself back, afraid of losing control, afraid of trusting too much, afraid of letting someone see past her careful defenses to the chaos of want underneath. And now she might never get the chance to tell him, might never get to explain that she understood now, about necessary secrets and complicated choices, about trying to do the right thing even when it cost you everything, about how sometimes the bravest thing wasn't maintaining perfect control, but letting yourself be vulnerable enough to love.
Degradation at 70%.
The technician said.
Soon there won't be enough magical resonance left to...
The door exploded inward in a surge of fusion magic that made the remains of Sera's power sing in recognition. Through the smoke and crystal shards, a familiar voice called her name. Dark eyes met hers across the chaos, and for the first time since the device started pulling her apart, Sera felt something like hope flutter in her chest.
You're late.
She managed, though her voice shook with more than pain. Casper's crooked smile flashed as he deflected a guard's attack without looking away from her.
Technically, you told me to go away, but I've never been good at following orders.
More guards poured into the room, but they weren't alone. Storm grey feathers flashed as Arya swept in through the broken windows. Mira's augmentations whirred as she engaged 3 guards at once. Lynn's crystalline form flowed through the walls like living light. But Sera barely noticed them. She was too focused on the way Casper moved through the chaos toward her, his magic already reaching for the device's controls. The way his hands shook slightly as they worked to disconnect her from its pulling grasp. The way his eyes kept finding hers, full of things that looked a lot like her own tangled feelings.
I'm sorry.
They both said at once as the restraints finally released. Sera started to laugh, but the sound turned into a sob as the last of the device's influence faded. She fell forward, her legs too weak to hold her. But Casper caught her, just like that first morning, just like every time she'd needed him since.
I should have listened.
She whispered against his chest.
Should have let you explain about the prince, about your past, about...
And I should have trusted you with the truth from the start.
His arms tightened around her.
Should have known you'd understand about trying to fix past mistakes. About choosing a harder path when the easy one turns out to be wrong.
Around them, the battle continued. Arya's wind magic sang counterpoint to Mira's mechanical strength. Lynn's crystalline resonance turned guards' attacks back on themselves. But in Casper's arms, Sera felt safer than any careful control had ever made her.
My magic.
She managed.
The device... I don't know how much is left. I might not be able to...
I don't care.
His voice was fierce against her hair.
I didn't fall in love with your magic, Sera. I fell in love with the girl who experiments with T-blends and fusion harmonics, who sees patterns everyone else misses, who's brilliant and stubborn and absolutely terrifying when she's covered in tea leaves and magical residue.
Sera's breath caught.
Love?
Love.
He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes.
And before you start overthinking it, yes, I'm sure. Yes, even without magic. Yes, even with all our complications and mistakes and...
She cut him off with a kiss that tasted like certainty. Like tea leaves finding their proper blend. Like magic flowing naturally instead of being forced. Like finally letting herself trust in a harmony greater than perfect control. A crash from nearby reminded them rather abruptly that they were in the middle of a battle. Casper's arms tightened protectively around her as more guards appeared in the doorway.
Ready to get out of here?
He asked, that crooked smile appearing again. Sera looked up at him, at the love and trust and absolutely zero perfect control in his expression.
With you? Always.
His smile widened as he helped her to her feet.
Good. Because I think we're about to make a very unauthorized exit from the prince's flagship.
How unauthorized?
Let's just say fusion magic and airship crystals don't usually mix this explosively.
Sera found herself smiling despite everything. The lingering pain, the weakness in her legs, the guards closing in around them. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of losing control. She was ready to fall, knowing someone would be there to catch her.
The midnight dive is docked at the lower stern.
Casper explained as they fought their way through the flagship's corridors. His arm around her waist supported most of her weight, but his other hand moved in precise magical patterns that sent guards flying.
Arya cleared us a path through the windshields.
Bold of you to assume I'd want to escape with you.
Sera managed, though she leaned into him more heavily with each step. The device's draining effects left her feeling hollow, a remaining magic flickering like a candle in strong wind. His laugh rumbled through his chest where she pressed against him.
Stubborn to the end. It's one of the things I love about you.
The casual way he said it, like loving her was the most natural thing in the world, made her heart skip. But before she could respond, more guards appeared ahead.
Down.
Mira called from behind them. Her augmentations whirred as she launched herself over their heads, mechanical limbs blazing with combat energy. The guards scattered like leaves in a storm. Lynn flowed through the walls beside them, her crystalline form refracting the flagship's emergency lights.
The prince is mobilizing his elite guard. We need to move faster.
Sera's in no condition to run.
Casper said, his arm tightening protectively around her waist.
Then we improvise.
Arya swooped down from an upper window, her storm-gray wings spread wide.
Like a certain tea master taught me about letting solutions flow naturally.
Understanding passed between the women. Despite her weakened state, Sera found herself smiling.
Casper isn't going to like this plan.
What plan?
He started, but Arya had already grabbed them both, her wind magic wrapping around them like a cocoon.
Hold on to each other.
She ordered, then launched them all through the window. Sera heard Casper's startled curse as they plummeted through open air. His arms locked around her as Arya's wind magic guided their fall, spiraling them through gaps in the flagship's external crystal arrays. The wind tore at them, but Sera wasn't afraid. For the first time in her life, she let herself fall freely, trusting completely in the people around her. They landed on a lower deck, Arya's magic cushioning their impact. Casper immediately pulled Sera behind a stack of cargo crates as guards appeared above.
That,
He said, slightly breathless.
was not what I'd call a careful escape plan.
Careful plans are overrated.
Sera leaned against him, both for support and because she could. Because she didn't have to hold herself apart anymore.
Sometimes you have to trust in natural harmony.
His eyes softened as he looked down at her.
Even if that harmony involves jumping out windows?
Especially then.
More guards appeared, their weapons crackling with combat magic. But before they could attack, Mira dropped from above, her augmentations giving her impossible strength as she cleared a path. Lynn's crystalline form created barriers of pure light, protecting them from magical attacks.
The midnight dive is 3 levels down.
Casper said, already moving them toward the edge of the deck.
Think you can handle another fall?
Sera started to answer, but movement above caught her attention. Yellow robes caught the morning light as the prince emerged onto a higher balcony, his perfect features showing real anger for the first time.
I truly hoped it wouldn't come to this,
He called, his voice carrying easily through the chaos.
that you would understand the necessity of practical action,
His jade eyes fixed on Casper.
that you, of all people, would remember what happens to those who choose impractical idealism over necessary control.
I remember everything.
Casper's voice turned hard.
Every compromise, every rationalization, every practical necessity that led us further from what was right. That's why I left.
Left?
The prince's perfect smile held no warmth.
You betrayed everything we built, destroyed years of research, turned our greatest weapons into broken toys.
His voice dropped lower.
And now you're doing it again, taking something precious and turning it into another failed experiment in impractical idealism.
Sera felt Casper tense, felt the old guilt and pain in his body where she pressed against him. Without thinking, she reached for what remained of her magic, letting it flow into him the way they had so many times before. Their powers merged instantly, naturally, creating something stronger than either alone. Like tea leaves finding their proper blend, like hearts finding their true harmony. The prince's jade eyes narrowed as he observed their combined magic.
How disappointing. I had hoped the device would have drained more of your power, Miss Night Whisper. No matter.
He gestured elegantly, and elite guards began moving into position around them.
Sometimes practical necessity requires more direct action.
Fun.
Arya called from above.
We'll hold them off.
But Sera and Caspar were already moving as one, their magic flowing together in patterns they'd perfected over weeks of working fusion arrays. The flagship's crystal matrices sang around them, recognizing harmonics that asked instead of forced, that invited instead of controlled.
You never understood.
Sera called to the prince as their combined power spread through the ship's systems.
Real harmony can't be forced or controlled. It has to flow naturally.
Like tea leaves finding their proper blend.
Caspar added, his magic moving with hers as easily as breathing.
Like hearts finding their true rhythm.
Sera finished. The flagship's crystals resonated with their words, with their perfectly merged magic, with the truth of natural harmony over forced control. Arrays began to flicker and fail as their power disrupted the prince's carefully maintained systems.
A jump.
Arya shouted as the deck began to tilt.
Now.
This time they didn't hesitate. Still holding each other, still maintaining that perfect magical merge, they launched themselves over the railing. Arya's wind magic caught them instantly, guiding their fall toward where the midnight dive waited below. They landed on the familiar deck as Mira and Lynn provided covering fire from above. The ship's crystal arrays hummed in welcome as their combined magic guided it away from the failing flagship.
Sera,
Caspar said urgently as they began their escape.
your magic.
Is exactly where it belongs.
She finished, still pressed against him, still letting their powers flow together.
With someone who understands that real harmony can't be forced.
His arms tightened around her as the midnight dive accelerated away from the flagship. Above them, Arya provided wind cover, while Mira and Lynn made their own escapes through different routes.
I love you.
He said softly against her hair.
Even without magic. Even with magic. Even with all our complications and imperfect harmonies and complete lack of proper control.
Sera smiled against his chest, feeling what remained of her magic sing in harmony with his.
I love you too. Even with your secrets and your past and your completely unauthorized escape plans.
Speaking of unauthorized,
He gestured to where the prince's flagship listed dramatically behind them, its crystal arrays still flickering from their combined magical assault.
that was quite an impressive display of fusion magic for someone who's supposed to be magically drained.
Turns out some harmonies are stronger than any draining device.
She looked up at him, letting him see everything she felt.
Some connections can't be pulled apart, no matter how practical the necessity.
His answer was to kiss her, right there on the deck of his ship as they fled through the morning clouds. Their magic merged even deeper, creating harmonics that sang of trust and love and letting go of perfect control. Behind them, the prince's flagship continued to drift, its perfect systems disrupted by power that flowed naturally instead of being forced. But Sera barely noticed, too lost in the feeling of finally letting herself fall completely into trust, into love, into harmony that couldn't be controlled, only accepted. The midnight dive sailed through quieter skies now, far from the prince's flagship and its perfect controlled harmonics. Sera sat wrapped in Caspar's coat in his cabin, feeling her magic slowly rebuild itself like tea leaves unfurling in hot water. Every time their powers touched, every casual brush of his magic against hers as he worked the ship's controls helped restore what the prince's device had tried to tear away.
The outposts moved to the western clouds.
Arya reported, landing lightly on the deck outside the cabin's open door.
Commander Chen didn't want to risk the prince tracking us there again.
Smart.
Caspar said, his hand absently finding Sera's as he studied their navigation charts. The contact sent warmth flowing through her, magical and physical and emotional all at once.
We'll need to adjust course to account for the evening thermals.
Sera leaned against him, letting their magic merge the way it seemed to want to naturally now. No more fighting it, no more careful distance. Just the simple rightness of their powers flowing together, strengthening each other.
Your harmonics are stabilizing.
Lynn observed from where she monitored Sera's recovery. The healer's crystalline form refracted the afternoon light, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the cabin walls.
The connection you share, I've never seen anything quite like it.
Like fusion magic made manifest.
Mira agreed from her position by the door. Her augmentations hummed quietly as she kept watch.
2 different types of power working together naturally.
Sera felt Caspar's smile against her hair.
Like tea leaves finding their proper blend.
Like hearts finding their true rhythm.
She finished, smiling at the phrase that had become their private shorthand for everything between them. Their magic sang together, pure and strong and getting stronger with each passing moment. Sera could feel her own power rebuilding itself, using their connection as a framework to restore what had been damaged. Like a plant growing toward sunlight, like harmony seeking its natural resolution.
I need to check the crystal arrays.
Caspar said reluctantly after a while.
That disruption we caused in the flagship systems created some unusual resonance patterns. Want to make sure they haven't affected our stabilization harmonics.
Sera nodded, but as soon as he moved away, she felt the loss like physical pain. Not just his warmth or his presence, but the steady support of his magic that had been helping rebuild her own. The cabin seemed colder somehow, emptier, though she could still see him through the window as he moved across the deck.
Don't fight it.
Lynn advised, noting her discomfort.
The connection between you is helping restore your natural harmonics. The separation may be uncomfortable, but it's temporary.
Like holding your breath.
Arya added, her feathers rustling with something like approval.
You know you'll breathe again soon, but that doesn't make the moment of waiting any easier.
Sera watched through the window as Caspar worked with the ship's crystal arrays. His movements were as sure as ever, his magic flowing through the systems with practiced ease. But she saw him glance back toward the cabin frequently, saw the way his power reached for hers even across the distance.
I used to be afraid of this.
She said softly, more to herself than the others.
Of needing someone this much. Of letting anyone that close to my magic, my heart.
And now?
Mira's mechanical eyes whirred as they tracked movement in the clouds, ever vigilant.
Now I understand what my mother was trying to tell me through her research. About how the strongest harmonies come from letting go of control. About how real power flows naturally like...
She smiled slightly.
Like tea leaves finding their proper blend.
Like hearts finding their true rhythm.
Arya finished, her wings shifting with amusement.
We know, you two are disgustingly in harmony. It's actually quite inspiring, in a nauseating sort of way.
But Sera barely heard her friend's teasing. She was too focused on the way her magic reached for Caspar's across the deck, the way their powers seemed to want to dance together even at a distance. Each time their energy touched, she felt a little more of her strength return. More than that, she felt the rightness of it. The way they fit together, not despite their differences, but because of them. Surface magic and sky magic, practical experience and theoretical innovation, careful planning and experimental freedom.
He's coming back,
Lynn announced, her crystalline form catching the light in new patterns.
Your harmonics are already steadying in anticipation.
Sera felt him before she saw him. Felt his magic reach for hers, felt her power surge in response. By the time he entered the cabin, their energy was already merging again, as natural as breathing.
The arrays are stable,
he reported, immediately moving to her side. His hand found hers as if drawn there by gravity.
Though they seem to work better when...
He trailed off, gesturing to where their magic danced together.
When we're in harmony?
Sera suggested, letting herself lean into him completely. No more holding back, no more careful distance.
When we're together,
He corrected softly. Then quieter.
I feel it too, you know. The emptiness when we're apart. Like all the harmonics are slightly off key until we're close enough to...
To let them flow naturally.
She finished. Their magic swirled together, stronger than ever, helping rebuild what the prince had tried to tear apart.
Right, that's our cue to give you some privacy. Try not to merge your magical energies too enthusiastically. We still need to maintain steady altitude.
Sera felt herself blush, but Caspar just laughed. His arms tightened around her as their friends filed out, leaving them alone in the gentle afternoon light.
I used to think I needed to atone.
He said softly once they were alone.
For everything I helped the prince create, for all the damage my weapons caused. Thought if I worked hard enough, saved enough people, maybe I could balance the scales.
And now?
Now I understand what you taught me about harmony.
His fingers traced patterns on her arm that made their magic sing.
That real balance isn't about careful control or mathematical precision. It's about letting things flow naturally toward their proper resolution.
Even if that resolution involves falling in love with a stubborn experimental tea master?
Especially then.
He smiled against her hair.
Though I think I started falling that first morning, when you were covered in tea leaves and magical residue, but still somehow the most fascinating thing I'd ever seen.
Sera turned in his arms to face him properly.
I love you.
She said simply.
All of you. Your past, your present, your future, your secrets and your guilt, and your completely unauthorized escape plans.
I love you too.
His dark eyes held hers as their magic danced between them.
Your stubborn pride and your brilliant mind and your absolutely terrifying experimental magic. Everything you are, everything you'll become.
She kissed him then, letting their power merge completely. Letting herself fall into the harmony they created together, knowing he would always be there to catch her. The midnight dive sailed on through golden afternoon light, carrying them toward the hidden outpost and whatever challenges lay ahead. But for now, in this moment, there was just this. Their magic flowing together like tea leaves, finding their proper blend, like hearts finding their true rhythm, like love finding its natural harmony. Chapter 13. Natural Harmony. Wind rushed through Sera's hair as she stood at the midnight dive's bow, her ribbon dancing free in the breeze. No careful control here, no perfectly maintained appearance, just the pure joy of flying between cloud kingdoms, of letting her magic dance with the air currents the way it wanted to naturally.
Storm front ahead.
Caspar called from the helm, but his voice held more excitement than concern.
Want to try that new harmonic pattern we discussed?
Sera grinned, already moving to the crystal array. Their magic reached for each other before they even touched, merging with the easy familiarity of hearts that knew their true rhythm. Around them, the ship's crystals began to sing.
The harmonics are stronger every time you two do this.
Arya observed from above, her wings spread wide to read the approaching storm.
It's like watching fusion magic evolve in real time.
That's because they finally stopped fighting it.
Mira said from her position near the cargo holds, where their latest shipment of deep crystal waited to be delivered to the next failing city. Her augmentations hummed contentedly as she secured the precious cargo. Lynn's crystalline form sparkled in the morning light as she monitored their magical output.
The resonance patterns you create together, they're unlike anything in the old records. A perfect blend of surface and sky magic, of innovation and experience.
Like tea leaves finding their proper blend?
Caspar suggested, moving behind Sera to better coordinate their magic through the storm. His chest pressed against her back as naturally as their powers flowed together.
Like hearts finding their true rhythm.
She finished, leaning into him as they guided the ship into the storm's embrace. Lightning crackled around them, but their combined magic turned its wild energy into something beautiful. The storm didn't fight them as they passed through. Instead, it seemed to dance with them, recognizing the natural harmony they created together.
Remember when you used to insist on doing everything alone?
Casper murmured against her ear as they worked.
All proper control and careful distance?
Remember when you used to keep secrets about everything?
She shot back, but there was no heat in it. Only the warm familiarity of lovers who had moved past their fears together. His laugh rumbled through his chest into her back.
Touché. Though I maintain that some of those secrets led to very interesting conversations in your workshop.
You mean arguments in my workshop?
I prefer to think of them as spirited debates about the nature of harmony.
Is that what we're calling tea explosions now?
Their magic swirled together as they bantered, guiding the ship through the storm with the ease of long practice. Each city they visited, each platform they helped stabilize, made their connection stronger. Like they were learning a dance together, each step more natural than the last. The storm began to clear, revealing their destination ahead. Another floating city showing signs of harmonic degradation. But unlike before, when such sights had filled Sera with anxiety about proper procedures and perfect control, now she felt only excitement about the possibilities.
Their anchor network is failing in the eastern quadrant,
Lynn reported, her crystalline form refracting the emerging sunlight.
Similar patterns to what we saw in Cloudspire last week.
Then we already know which harmonic sequences work best,
Sera said, her mind already flowing through possible combinations. She felt Casper's magic shift with hers, anticipating her thoughts the way he always did now.
The tea house taught you well,
He observed as they began preparations for the stabilization work.
all those years of reading harmonics and tea leaves.
The tea house taught me control.
She corrected, turning in his arms to face him.
You taught me how to let go, how to let magic flow naturally, instead of forcing it into traditional patterns.
His dark eyes softened as he looked at her.
You taught me a few things about letting go too, you know. About trusting in natural harmony instead of trying to atone through rigid purpose.
If you two are quite finished being disgustingly in love,
Arya called from above,
we have a city to save.
but Sera saw her friend's feathers quiver with approval as they prepared to dock. Saw the way Mira's mechanical eyes whirred contentedly as she readied the deep crystal shipment. Saw Lynn's crystalline form sparkle with something like joy as she monitored their perfectly merged magical signatures. Their little family, brought together by chaos and necessity, now bound by something stronger than any forced harmony could create.
Ready?
Casper asked as they approached the failing city. His hand found hers as naturally as breathing.
With you, always.
Sera squeezed his fingers, feeling their magic dance between them.
Though I still think we should start every stabilization with a proper tea ceremony.
Absolutely not.
Arya cut in.
The last time you two made tea together, we nearly had another explosion.
That wasn't an explosion.
Sera protested.
It was an unexpected harmonic resonance.
That just happened to cover everyone in tea leaves?
Mira's augmentations whirred with amusement.
It was a very controlled, unexpected harmonic resonance.
Casper said with dignity, though his eyes crinkled at the corners.
And I maintain that tea leaves are a perfectly respectable fashion choice.
Sera laughed, remembering that first morning when everything had changed. When a suspicious surface captain had caught her falling and looked at her like she was fascinating, even covered in magical residue. Now here they were, sailing between cloud kingdoms together, saving cities with their combined magic, creating new kinds of harmony no one had ever seen before. No more hiding behind tradition, no more secrets kept out of fear. Just the pure joy of letting their powers dance together, of letting their hearts beat in natural rhythm. The city ahead showed signs of severe harmonic degradation, platforms listing dangerously, anchor crystals screaming in discord. But Sera felt no fear as they approached. Only excitement about the possibilities, about the new patterns she and Caspar might discover together.
You're thinking too loud again.
He murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple.
I'm thinking about harmony,
She corrected.
about how sometimes the best things in life come from letting go of control, from trusting in natural resonance instead of forcing everything into traditional patterns.
Like experimental tea masters and suspicious surface captains?
Exactly like that.
She turned to kiss him properly, their magic surging between them with joy that couldn't be contained. Arya made gagging sounds above them, while Mira and Lynn pointedly looked away. But Sera didn't care. She was too happy, too in love, too perfectly in harmony with everything around her to maintain any kind of proper appearance now. The failing city waited ahead, its discord a challenge they would face together. But first, this moment of perfect connection, of magic dancing between them like tea leaves finding their proper blend, like hearts finding their true rhythm, like love finding its natural harmony in the endless sky. After stabilizing the city's anchor network, they found a quiet spot among the sunset clouds to moor the midnight dive. Sera stood at the ship's rail, watching aurora lights dance through the evening sky, a rare phenomenon this far south that turned the clouds into sheets of flowing color.
Beautiful, isn't it?
Caspar's voice was soft as he joined her, his arms sliding around her waist from behind. Their magic merged instantly, naturally, making the ship's crystals hum with harmonics that matched the aurora's dance.
Perfect.
She agreed, leaning back against him. The others had gone to rest in the city, giving them rare privacy aboard the ship. Above them, stars began to emerge like scattered crystal dust, while below, the aurora's reflection turned the cloud sea into flowing rainbow light. Caspar's lips found the sensitive spot behind her ear that always made her magic surge.
I love watching you work.
He murmured.
The way you let power flow naturally now, without trying to control everything.
I had a good teacher.
She turned in his arms, letting her hands slide up his chest to tangle in his sun-bleached hair.
Someone who showed me that the best harmonies come from letting go.
Their magic danced between them as they kissed, natural and wild and perfect. Like tea leaves finding their proper blend, like hearts finding their true rhythm, like two people who had finally, completely found their harmony together. They made their way to their cabin without breaking contact, unable and unwilling to separate even for a moment. The aurora light spilled through the windows, painting everything in shifting colors that matched the way their magic moved together. Sera felt Caspar's power merge deeper with hers as clothing fell away, as skin met skin in a dance as old as harmony itself. Their magic surged and swirled around them, making the ship's crystals sing with pure joy.
I love you.
He breathed against her skin.
All of you. Your brilliance, your stubbornness, your absolutely terrifying experimental magic.
I love you too.
She arched into his touch as their powers wound tighter together.
Your secrets, your strength, your completely unauthorized ways of showing affection.
Their magic built between them like a storm, like fusion harmonics finding perfect resonance, like everything they'd ever dreamed of, but better because it was real, because it was them, together, creating something more beautiful than either could achieve alone. When they finally came together fully, their magic exploded outward in a surge of pure harmony that made aurora lights dance through the cabin. Every crystal on the ship began to sing, resonating with the perfect connection they created together. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets that shimmered with residual magical energy, watching aurora patterns play across the ceiling. Their power still moved between them in gentle waves, like the aftermath of a perfect tea ceremony, like hearts beating in matched rhythm.
I used to dream about this,
Sera admitted softly, tracing patterns on Casper's chest that made their magic spark.
Even that first morning in the tea house, when you caught me falling, I dreamed about letting go completely, about finding perfect harmony with someone who understood both the experimental magic and the proper tea master in me.
I dreamed about you too.
He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent warmth spreading through her entire body.
About finding someone who could see past all my secrets and mistakes to who I really was. Who could help me create something beautiful instead of just atoning for past damage.
Their magic swirled together, gentle now, but no less powerful. Through the windows, aurora lights continued their dance across the cloud sea, as if nature itself celebrated their perfect harmony.
We should probably check the ship's crystals.
Sera mused after a while.
That last surge of magic was rather intense.
Casper's laugh rumbled through his chest where she lay against him.
Worried about unexpected harmonics?
More worried about Arya's reaction if we destabilized anything with our enthusiasm.
Worth it.
He declared, pulling her closer.
Though maybe next time we should set up some dampening arrays first.
Next time?
She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him properly, enjoying the way aurora light played across his features.
Rather presumptuous of you, Captain.
His crooked smile appeared, the one that still made her heart skip even after everything they'd been through together.
I was thinking we could experiment with different harmonic frequencies. For scientific purposes, of course.
Of course.
She tried to maintain a serious expression.
Very proper and controlled experiments.
Absolutely.
His hand slid down her back in a way that was anything but proper.
Though I seem to recall someone saying the best harmonies come from letting go of control.
Their magic surged again as he pulled her down for another kiss. Outside, aurora lights painted the clouds in ever-changing colors while stars wheeled overhead. The ship's crystals hummed with contentment, like they too had found their perfect harmony. This, Sera thought as they lost themselves in each other again, was what she'd been missing all those years of careful control and proper behavior. This wild joy, this perfect trust, this complete acceptance of natural harmony in all its forms. Later, much later, they stood together at the rail again, wrapped in a blanket as they watched dawn approach. The aurora had faded, but their magic still danced between them, as natural as breathing now.
Ready for another day of saving cities?
Casper asked, pressing a kiss to her shoulder that made their power spark.
With you?
Sera turned in his arms, feeling more perfectly herself than she ever had before. No more hiding behind tradition, no more fear of losing control. Just this love, this trust, this harmony they'd created together.
Always.
The sun rose over the cloud sea, painting the sky in colors that reminded her of that first morning in her tea house, when everything had changed. But this sunrise felt different, felt like promise instead of fear, like possibility instead of control, like love finding its perfect natural harmony in the endless sky. Like hearts finding their true rhythm at last. Like forever, stretching out before them as vast and beautiful as the dawn,